Today we're going to show you how we created this cabinet that you see right here that took Instagram by storm, and we created our own version of it right here. This is beautiful. We love this cabinet. We love the arches, all of these cool details. We've got these vertical pieces that are in here that are actually inlaid into the shelves. We're going to show you how we did it. Let's get started. As with any project, we're going to start out using some good quality plywood. Now, oftentimes we will use birch plywood for a lot of our projects, but this time we're actually going to use maple plywood because we think we're going to end up staining this, and so I think that the maple may take the stain a little bit better than the birch. And I've also got some maple that I can use for edge banding on the edges of the plywood to hopefully make all of that match up. So that's the reason we're going to use that. The biggest thing here to remember is that when you're picking your plywood, you just want to make sure you've got something that has good plies. So a lot of times you will find some cheaper stuff at Lowe's or Home Depot, and that stuff is typically less plies, and it's usually a lot more prone to warp and cause some other problems as well. One of the benefits of having more plies with your plywood is typically you get a lot better screw holding power as well as just stability. Now, dimension-wise for this cabinet, we're building this for a specific space, and so you could really tailor this however you want to do it. For us, the sides and the top are going to be about 11 inches wide, and then on the length, so basically we're going to do two sides that are going to be about 48 inches tall, and then our cabinet overall width needs to be about 44 inches wide. So again, this is something that you could build for whatever your space needs to be. I know the original cabinet that we're kind of mocking this after is actually a little bit taller and a little bit narrower. Next, we're going to start by planing up some maple, and the plan here is, like I said earlier, we're going to use hardwood edge banding for the edges of the plywood. I didn't really want to just use iron-on because it was going to be so visible. Sometimes you can actually kind of see kind of the glue line, and sometimes it's a little bit harder to get that perfect. And also with the fact that we may end up staining this, I didn't really know for sure how that glue line would look. Okay, so when we were planing this stuff just now, it started making a ton of racket just out of nowhere. And it looks like, so the way this works is, this is kind of, I've opened this up, but essentially this pulley goes here, this belt goes over it, and we have apparently thrown, there's a metal key that's supposed to go in here. We've thrown that key, I guess. Thankfully, I keep some on hand, because why not? Anyway, so we're going to change this out, cross our fingers that that's all the problem is, and it's not like a bearing or something else that actually caused this to throw. So, well, we can rejoice because it turns out it was just that key had come loose. So got that thing put in, tightened back up, and thankfully everything's running good. Now, this planer is a Shopsmith planer. It is about, it's over 30 years old, but my dad gave this to me, and honestly, it's one of those things, I've thought about upgrading to a different planer, and maybe one of these days that I will, but honestly, this thing still does what I need it to do. And you know, when it's something that's free, it's also kind of a hand-me-down. It's kind of a little bit hard to get rid of. And again, it's doing what I need it to do. Once we've got this all planed down the same thickness, we're going to go ahead and start ripping this down to be our edge banding. Now, this is pretty simple. All we're going to do is take this and we're going to make it at 1/4 of an inch. That's it. You could do this with a thin rip jig. You could also just set your table saw on 1/4 of an inch if you've got a safe way to do this. And to attach your edge banding, all you're going to do is just simply use glue. This is Titebond 2. It's what I use for most of my projects. And we're going to apply this, and then once we attach it and put it on, you've got a couple of different ways that you can hold this in place. So I bought a few of these bandy clamps that you can pick up from Rockler and Amazon and different places. I wanted to try them out. Turns out I actually like these a lot. They're a little bit expensive, but they seem pretty handy. But I didn't have enough to be able to do everything I needed to do for this project, so I'm also having to substitute this with blue painter's tape. I just pulled this really tight, and honestly it worked just fine. Now, I made sure to leave this edge banding a little bit long off of each end so that once this glue dries, I can come back with a Japanese handsaw and I can flush this up and leave it nice and perfect. I was also careful to leave the edge banding a little bit wider than the actual shelves as well. So what I'm going to do now is I'll take a flush trim bit here on my router, and I'm just going to flush this up perfect. If you don't have a flush trim bit for your router, I'm telling you, this is one of the most used bits that I have because it's the simplest way sometimes to just go in and to just smooth something up on an edge. Doesn't matter what it is. it will make it dead perfect. When it comes to cabinet construction, most of the time I just use pocket screws. In this case, there's a couple of things to keep in mind. So my pocket screws are actually going to be on the top and the bottom pieces. That's how I'm going to hide this. Okay, so the bottom, I'm going to put the pocket screws to where they're on the bottom of the shelf. So that's going to be against the floor. You'll never see the holes. Same thing with the top. So the top, I'm going to put them underneath. This shelf is not tall enough that anybody would ever be underneath looking up to see those holes. So I'm just going to put them on the bottom side of the top shelf. As for the shelves that are going to go in between, I'll do the exact same thing. They're just going to be on the bottom side of those shelves. You will never see those holes. Now, earlier when I was cutting out the edge banding, I went ahead and I ripped a couple pieces 2 inches wide. These are for the 2 vertical dividers that go up and down. The original picture that we're kind of mocking this after, it looks to me like that those dividers are rounded on the front edge. This adds a little bit of interest in my opinion and kind of gives it a little bit of depth. So I'll just simply run around over a bit over each side, and this will kind of give us that rounded look. So I mentioned earlier that the joinery is going to be pocket screws, and we're also going to add some glue to this to help strengthen that joint as well. And this is going to make a really strong joint. It's going to be really good. The other thing you got to remember is that you're really just making a square. So you got your sides, you got your top and your bottom, and you're just simply going to make sure that they stay square. That's the most important thing. So I achieved this by using the CSP clamping squares from Woodpeckers. They're kind of expensive, but you can find other options like this on Amazon as well. Essentially, the main thing is just make sure it's all square. So now we're at a point where we need to cut out the arches that are going to be on that big wide piece on the top. So rather than try to cut out 3 arches exactly perfect and them all be the same, I've taken some MDF and we've kind of created a template. And our hope is, so essentially this is the same size as what we're going to be working with. And so our plan is to put this over it and use a flush trim bit and try to cut this out with a flush trim bit, and then move this template down to the next arch and then the last arch essentially, and get all of them the same as this one arch. So crossing our fingers. So I'm using some double-sided tape here to put on the pattern. Now, if you don't have any of this stuff, I'm telling you, this stuff is super handy. It's great for things like this. So I'll be able to just take this, flip it over, and it'll hold it in place while I do this. Now, I do make a mistake or two here. One of the mistakes that I made was, and I kind of knew better, but I was kind of being lazy, is I just wanted to try to just cut this out with just the flush trim bit. So then I'm hogging out a ton of material, and unfortunately when I did that, it ended up busting off a piece on the corner. And then after that, my wife had to spend some time trying to talk me off the ledge to make sure that I wasn't about to get really, really angry and like destroy the piece and kind of go all Hulk smash on the whole thing. So yeah, don't do that. Don't be lazy. And this is her actually looking around now trying to find the piece, because she's like, listen, chill out. We can glue this back. We can fix this. And she was right. We ended up gluing it back and we fixed it. She's right most of the time. So the lesson here is don't be lazy. I take a jigsaw this go around and I get really close to the line, and then I take my flush trim bit and I go around and I'm just taking off a very small amount of material. That's the best way to do this. Oh, and if you're wondering about what size this piece is that we made the arches out of, this thing is about 9 inches wide. Next, we start ripping the pieces that are going to be the shelves. Now, the shelves actually do not come all the way out to the edges of the sides and the top and all of that. It's a little bit narrower. Again, we're adding some depth, so it's going to set in a little bit from the sides. Then you've also got the vertical pieces that are going to be in there as well. So you're creating a lot of dimension here with this. So this is about 10.5 is what we're cutting these shelves on. The sides and the top and bottom were about 11 inches. And this is a fun shot of me and my wife doing two things that we hate, just sanding and putting on edge banding. So we figured that we would go ahead and we would just suffer together. I also think this was about midnight one night when we were doing this. So, you know, these are projects like this. When you see stuff like this on YouTube, you see things that people are doing. Just remember that these projects a lot of times don't go nearly as smooth, and editing makes things look a lot more magical than they are. But sometimes it's just sanding and cutting edge banding and doing a lot of stuff that's just not really fun and sexy. But with all that being said, it is nice when you finally start to see a project start to come together, and it doesn't just look like a simple primitive box. And when we were attaching these arches, that was when it finally started to click. We just attached this with a 23 gauge pin nailer. Shouldn't be getting a lot of stress on it, and this will just kind of help to hide any kind of nail holes. The amount of time that I took to get everything perfect when it came to putting in these vertical dividers is astonishing. But I hate for things to be out of line. I hate for things to not be perfect. And so I was very, very particular about getting this correct. The blue painter's tape is actually what I put on there so that I could actually put marks to put exactly where center was at, exactly where the edges of my pieces were going to go on the dividers. And I did the same thing on the bottom because I just didn't want to have to do a bunch of erasing and stuff. So I just put painter's tape in there, and then I'll just peel this up. But take your time and get this perfect. These dividers are going to land directly in between the arches there, as you can kind of see, and then you got to get that same distance across on the bottom. I don't think that my wife has ever actually had me build a project that was just normal. So like this shelf just couldn't be a 4-square shelf. We had to have arches. We got to have these vertical pieces going up and down. And not only are those vertical pieces going up and down, they also notch into the shelving. So I take and I put this on my table saw sled, and I just simply slowly kind of notch this out until I get a space exactly the right size. So this took a lot of measurement, a lot of time, try to get this all perfect, and it's probably going to take a lot of back and forth. Just take your time, you'll get there. And we can't forget this little piece of trim that goes across the top above the arches. So it just sits on top of that arch piece. And man, just a simple little thing like this adds a lot of character and a lot of detail. So don't forget something like this. Again, we're just hitting this with a 23 gauge pin nailer.
So we ended up having to pivot a little bit. The original design was to go ahead and stain it with a transparent stain. But because the maple plywood stained differently than the solid maple, we had to pivot. So we ended up going with a solid stain, which kind of goes on like a paint. I've never used this before, but it's pretty cool. So 1 coat will still let you see the wood grain through. 2 coats makes it look like it's solid. So the next part, now that it's painted, it was easier to paint it while it was not put together, just because the shelves actually fit over these slats like so. So we're going to install those next, and then put the back on and take it upstairs, and then it'll be time for me to decorate it.
It's really tempting sometimes when you're building something to think that you got to use a tape measure for everything. So take these shelves, for example. It would be really tempting to just use a tape measure and try to figure out and make marks and get everything perfect on how high up those shelves need to be. The easiest thing to do here is to just put a piece underneath the shelf. So this is what I've done. I've just cut a couple of pieces the exact same length, and now I can just set my shelves in here and set it down. That's what that other piece is that you see kind of back there, kind of back behind me, is it just allows us to be able to set this on there, and now we're not fighting this thing when we're getting ready to start adding the pocket screws. And as much as I dislike sometimes these crazy little designs that my wife comes up with, I do have to admit that most of the time when I get done, they look pretty awesome. And in this case, I love the way that these vertical pieces notch into these shelves. It really does add a whole different level of just class and coolness to it. The camera probably doesn't do it justice, but it really does set it off. Now we're going to rip out our back panel. This is 1/4-inch plywood, and I did not do a good job of explaining this earlier, but this back panel actually recesses into the sides and the top. So I ended up cutting a rabbet all the way around for the sides and the top so that this would set inside of the cabinet. And so when you're looking at it against the wall from the sides, you can't see the back panel. You can't see the edges of the back panel from the sides. So this is just a little detail, a little thing that you can do that adds a different level of craftsmanship to what you're doing, and it really cleans things up. And I gotta be honest, as much of a pain in the butt as this thing was, there are just these moments when you finally get a project done and you turn it around and you look at everything, and it's kind of that move that bus kind of moment that you're like, wow, like, okay, turns out this crazy design that my wife wanted to build actually was pretty cool.